Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of ForbesWomen. Earlier this week, the Trump administration moved to toss out a lawsuit from 3 Republican states regarding access to the abortion medication Mifepristone. Joining us to talk about this slightly surprising move is Harry Nelson. He is a leading healthcare attorney and the founder of the law firm Nelson Hardiman. Harry, thanks so much for coming back.
Great to be with you, Maggie.
So let's talk about this move from the Trump administration, because I framed it as somewhat surprising because it kind of seems in line with what the Biden administration would have done. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, this specific move by the Trump administration to essentially to abandon this case effectively, to move to dismiss it, does look like something that the Biden administration would have also supported. Although I think when you dig deeper, it's a much more complicated decision here and a little bit more tactical and procedural than substantive.
Okay, so let's dig in. How is it a little more complicated, and what are you looking at here?
So, the whole question is the Supreme Court, made a decision that the parties challenging access to the drug being used for medication abortion, mifepristone, is, the FDA approval wasn't appropriate. And the Supreme Court dismissal of that case back in June of 2024 was based on the standing of the parties who brought the case. And so now what's happened is that you had the attorney generals of a number of abortion restrictive states, Missouri, Kansas, and Idaho, essentially saying, well, we've got standing and we want to revive this effort. Instead of it being a group of doctors, we as states want to challenge it. And so the Trump administration, Department of Justice, has come in and made a motion to dismiss and said, no, you, Missouri, you lack standing. Also, this is the wrong venue. You're down in Texas shopping for a judge who's going to be supportive of these arguments, Judge Kaczmarek, who decided the previous case. And this has been around for too long. This is going back to a challenge that started in 2016 and is just the statute of limitations has run. So those are the arguments that the Department of Justice under President Trump is now making to basically get Missouri and these other states out of the courthouse.
So it's really similar to the Supreme Court's decision back in June 2024. It's a matter of legal procedure and less about political ideology around access to the abortion pill.
Yeah, nobody should read this as the Trump administration shifting abortion policy. The bottom line is that we know we're dealing with an administration that is hostile to the FDA decisions around mifepristone, specifically giving access to medication abortion by telemedicine so that patients can pursue it privately in front of their computer screens. They object to mail delivery of the drug. They object to the FDA-approved 10-week window for the use of the drug. The Trump administration has not moved on any of those issues. My sense is they want to deal with those issues at the FDA, and what they're afraid of here is two things. Number one, that this case may be a sideshow, and number two, that the states are that this is an area where state power could undermine the ability of the FDA to manage this issue directly. And now that they control the FDA, that's a simpler and easier place to take the actions that we should fully expect from them to be restrictive ultimately on access to mifepristone.
I see. I was going to ask you if these cases were basically dismissed on standing or on a matter of legal procedure, if there are other cases that have stronger standing and could go through. But is it less a matter of that and more a matter of who's in charge of the FDA and the FDA's ability to impose restrictions under this new administration?
That's right. What I fully expect is once this case is out of the way, within the next I would expect within the next year or so, we will begin to see the makings of a strategy within the FDA to reconsider all of the decisions that happened. They actually began at the end of the Trump administration during the COVID pandemic, and then they were put in place, rescinded by the Trump administration, and then reinstated by the Biden team to at FDA. So I think we're going to see the Trump administration working within the FDA to really restrict, put the limitations back on mifepristone, requiring in-person visits so that there isn't telemedicine. At a minimum, that's my and not allowing mailing of the medication. They can do that. Unfortunately, for anybody who supports access to abortion, the reality is that through the process of what are called risk evaluation and mitigation studies, REMS reports, they can put conditions on particular drugs. It just so happens that other than controlled substances and psychotropic drugs, very few drugs have these limitations on them. But that's an easy tool that's available to the Trump administration and to the FDA leadership to pursue.
And then in that scenario, we're talking about a drug that the FDA approved long ago. What is the legal recourse if restrictions are put on mifepristone? Is there any?
So it's a tough case. There will be a right to be heard on the changes, but the problem is that the federal courts and ultimately likely the Supreme Court may be asked to review on a standard that is much more deferential to the choices at FDA, meaning that there has to be a notice and an opportunity to be heard on the rationality of the choice, but the courts may ultimately be reviewing this on what we call a rational basis standard, which is, was there evidence to support the government's decision? And candidly, like looking at the makeup of the federal courts and the Supreme Court, it's not at all clear to me or to most observers that we have a court that would challenge the rationality, even if there isn't good evidence to suggest that this drug has been in any way a threat to safety. We know that we have a lot of federal judges and Supreme Court justices who are sympathetic to the cause of restricting abortion and limiting access.
Now, if the FDA reconsiders mifepristone and the availability of abortion medication over the mail, over telehealth, does that affect other medication that is available on telehealth? I'm thinking of folks who see their psychiatrist virtually and might get prescribed medicine they need to control their mental health or to manage their mental health. Would that be all-encompassing, or is this really narrowly focused, or could it be narrowly focused on abortion specifically?
Yeah, at the FDA, they have authority to apply limits to all drugs, but it goes on a drug by drug basis, right? The FDA has to initiate essentially new studies and reconsider its prior decision and explain why it's doing so as to mifepristone. So this is not going to affect any other drug. It's certainly a strategy that could be used on other drugs, but I don't anticipate that it will be. I think that most of the other sort of controversial medical issues that make the headlines are, drugs that have multiple uses. And while it is possible, for example, that drugs that are being used for gender reassignment could potentially be another topic. Those drugs are more complicated. They have multiple uses, and they would have to be dealt with separately. So I think this will be narrowly a mifepristone focused initiative at the FDA, and that we should be ready for it. And the only question will be whether the Trump administration wants to avoid controversy on this issue for political purposes. But that's going to be for all of us to find out.
Of course, the closer we get to a midterm year, the more of a political factor that could be. But of course, we're talking about several months to a year into the future. Let's bring this back to the here and now. So the Justice Department moved to dismiss these cases. What does that mean for the availability of mifepristone right now in May 2025?
So it means that mifepristone is freely available as a prescription drug. There are many on the ground, providers who are making the drug available, and there are multiple telemedicine websites so that patients can find these medications, in many places. If you happen to live in a state that has restrictions on abortion and limits these medications, which many states, in fact, all of the abortion restrictive states do, your options are more limited. There still are providers. There are telemedicine providers that will ship into the state under shield laws that in their own states that allow them to ship out of state. And there are, of course, international providers like Plan B, who are also shipping into the country. So so there are still options today. Mifepristone is still widely available, and and that we don't expect that to change in the near term.
We don't expect that to change in the near term. Harry Nelson, thank you so much for joining us to break down some complicated legal proceedings as it relates to mifepristone. We really appreciate your insight.
Maggie, thanks again for the opportunity.